So in this video, we're going to look at creating a really cool granular bass tone, which we're going to add into our scanner bass set that we were just working on. And this is what the granular bass tone sounds like by itself. And I'll just do a couple sweeps here because we've got some nice macros set up. And I'll let you hear what it sounds like alongside the material that we created using our scanner bass. So it's a really complex tone, and it's super fun to make. And we're going to start having a look at it. So to make our granular bass tone here, we're going to work in Camel Audio's Alchemy, which is an awesome synth. It's a sample playback monster synth. And it has a sort of similar feel in some ways to Massive or to Synth Squad in its complexity and its depth. It doesn't use a drag and drop modulation method like Massive does, but it does use a very easy to figure out system of overlays, and you can add multiple instances of LFOs and envelopes and so on. So the initialization patch for Alchemy is a simple one oscillator sawtooth wave, which sounds like that. And we can actually access all of the in-depth parameters of each of these four sources, A through D, by clicking on their appropriate tabs. So right now we can see that A is the only one that's active. And under A, we can see that we're using the additive playback engine. And because we're going to be working on a granular tone here, I'm going to go and I'm going to load up some audio, and I'm going to turn the granular engine on. The granular engine actually comes on by default when you load audio in. But I'm just going to pull this up, and I'm going to go to the factory files here, and I'm going to go down to vocals. And I'm going to start going through until I find a male vocal that I like. So I'm going to start by loading up this male F1 G sharp. And let's just have a quick listen. And I think that's going to be the one. There's a lot of really nice pop end to it there, so it's going to give us a lot to work with. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop this down an octave because I want this to take up a little bit more of the bass register here. So let's have a listen again. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to pull the density in because I actually want to get that stuttery, granular sound of the grains looping one by one as opposed to overlapping. So let's hear that now. Okay, that's cool. And I'm going to pull the size in a little bit. Okay, that's a great starting point there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull the stretch in a bit. That way we're getting a little bit less motion as the grains scan up and down that file. And I'm going to pull the random time in. Actually, I'll lose the stretch entirely, and we'll work with the position modulation here. I'm going to go and just really quickly adjust a couple things. I'm going to pop it down to monophonic, and I'm going to introduce some glide. And glide sounds really cool when you're working with a granular engine. Probably a little bit too long there. I'm going to go and I'm just going to remove the release time on this envelope. This envelope is actually controlling our overall volume here, as we can see under the modulation master amp section. So by pulling the release in, we've now got our traditional toggle envelope on off. Still probably slightly too long in the glide time there. So one of the nice things with Alchemy, and this is partly because it is a sample playback synth, is it actually has a built-in filter section for each of these sources. which means that you can do some of your sound sculpting within the source section as opposed to within the filter section. So I'm just going to turn this filter tab on, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to hop in, and I'm going to dial up one of the high pass filters here. And I'm going to use this just to shave out some of the low frequencies. That way we can bring the overall volume up. So let's bring the cutoff up a little bit and have a quick listen. Add a little bit of resonance here. Okay, that's sounding good. And now I'm going to bring the overall amplitude of source A up in the mix. So I'm just going to quickly take a couple things from source A and apply them to a perform knob here. And we do this by right-clicking on whatever we want to modulate, going add modulation, and then selecting perform control, and then one of the knobs. So I'm going to go for control knob 1 here. And as you can see, this now applies control 1 to filter 1 cutoff A. I'm going to go and I'm going to also apply it to the size of the grain. And this is going to allow us to do a really nice dramatic sweep that's going to cause the grain size to collapse in on itself and become very, very short. And we're also going to be able to sweep the filter up at the same time. So I'm just going to have to go and control some of the depths here. So let's have a quick listen. So as of right now, control 1 is making that grain size a lot longer. I want to do the inverse with it. So now it is sweeping up a little bit. And I'm going to go and under the filter, click on that knob, and I'm going to adjust it so that we don't get a full sweep the entire way up out of that, but we do get a little bit of a high pass filter sweep by using that knob. So let's have a listen again. Probably still a little bit high, so I'm going to roll that down slightly. And we probably don't need the full range on this grain size. So I'm just going to dial it back a little bit so that it doesn't go all the way up to the top. Now, I'm liking that as a starting point for this sound, but I do want to actually change the window. So remember when we talked about the window, it was basically a word used to describe almost like an amp envelope on the grain's playback. And so depending on which window we choose, we're going to get very different sounds. So I'm going to go and I'm going to try both the ramp up and the ramp down, just to see what they sound like here. And go for ramp up. And I'm actually going to go and I'm going to try triangle as well. I think triangle is the winner here. That's sounding nice. So I'm going to leave it on triangle, and then I'm going to select stretch again. Remember, we don't have anything really happening with stretch right now in terms of a modulation, but I'm going to go and I'm going to add an LFO. So I'm going to go new LFO under our modulation sources here. So this is going to be LFO 2. And its depth is up all the way. I'm not going to want it up all the way. I'm going to want it start with 40%. And let's have a quick listen to this. Okay, I'm going to slow this down. I'm going to put it in unipolar mode as opposed to bipolar. And that's sounding a little bit more interesting here. And let's just try sweeping that perform knob 1 here with the LFO applied to stretch. I'm also going to go and I'm going to use perform knob 2 to control the grain size in an inverse proportion. So now when we sweep control knob 2 up, it's going to slow the grain down. It's going to increase the size of the grain. And we can use those in conjunction now within Live to automate this in a really, really cool way. And it's going to be quite expressive. So next up, I do want to get a little bit more aggression out of this particular tone. So I'm going to go into Alchemy's effects engine here. And I'm going to go and I'm going to start off by bringing in a distortion. And then I'm going to bring in a 3-band EQ here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust a couple settings within here to try and get a little bit more top end and a little bit more overall bite out of this. So we're going to start off with a little bit of tube distortion and a little bit of excite. Okay, I like that. And I'm going to go and I'm going to bring the gain on this EQ up a little bit. And we're going to sweep the frequency a little bit and see if we can find a sweet spot. And we're going to do the same thing with band 3 here. There, that's providing some nice top end. So now that we've got our initial granular tone dialed up nicely, I'm going to go in and I'm going to activate source B, which is going to give us a sawtooth wave here. And I'm just going to use this to layer underneath and just provide a little bit more body to this tone. We're going to be adding a sub as well, but I still want to have something that is just fattening Alchemy's output up a little bit. So I'm just going to hear how this sounds to begin here. Okay, so obviously we've got a lot going on in this. I'm going to go and I'm going to activate that filter section again. I'm going to turn on one of these filters here, and I'm just going to sweep it low. And that's sounding okay. I feel like I can bring the amp down a little bit, and it's going to just make it balance out a little bit nicer. Okay, that's sounding great. And finally in Alchemy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an instance of the multi-mode filter after all these effects. And this is just going to provide us with a little bit more interesting tone on the end here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with comb positive here. And I'm going to bring the cutoff up and the resonance up and the drive up a little bit. And we're just going to sweep the cutoff on this comb filter and see how it sounds. So we get a really nice, cool, phasey effect here. And I'm going to pull back the mix because we don't want 100% wet off of this. Let's listen again. Okay, that's great. I'm also going to go and I'm going to add a modulation to this, and we're going to go control knob 1 again. Let's just pop back, and under control knob 1, we'll see how that sounds. We're getting a full range there. It's probably a little bit too much. So I'm going to go and control 1. I'm going to bring the depth down on it. Let's have a listen again. That's squealing quite nicely there. So this is a great starting point, and I'm just going to actually exit Alchemy, and we're going to go have a look at live. So back in live here, I'm going to just convert Alchemy into an instrument rack, and I'm going to go and I'm going to do my typical approach of adding an instance of operator underneath. Operator is just such a good go-to for subs. I'm going to drop it down to one voice here. We're just going to quickly have a listen. And I'm going to do our very typical setup here of an EQ8 right after live in high quality mode, and use it to shave out the lows and the highs. I'm just going to roll down the highs here, and I'm going to roll down the lows a little bit so we're not getting rid of everything. And again, I'm going to put a utility after that EQ and pull the width all the way in. So let's have a listen to how that balances out with Alchemy. So that's got a lot more body to it now. And I do want to get an instance of EQ80 in after Alchemy. Again, high quality mode. And I'm just going to use it to shave out some of the lows from Alchemy, just in case they're interfering with operator. So next up, we're going to add a saturator to the output of that EQ8 after Alchemy there. And we'll start with the hot tubes, and we're just going to roll it back a bit. But let's have a listen to that to start with. And let's work on a little bit of stereo widening, again, using a simple delay here. And time mode 1 and 1.2. And I'm actually going to go and I'm going to take an instance of the Redux, and I'm going to put it just before that simple delay. And I'm going to put it into soft downsampling, bring it down a little bit. And I'm going to take that Redux and I'm going to put it into an audio effect rack and create a bypass chain. That way we're not getting 100% of the downsampled signal. I'm going to pull that down a tiny bit more in the mix. So that's getting to be a nice metallic sounding tone. I'm just going to minimize a couple things here. Now, so that we can actually do a little bit of automation here using those parameters that I've already set up in Alchemy, I'm just going to expand Alchemy's tab here, and I'm going to go Configure, and I'm going to touch both of these. So Control 1 and Control 2 here are now accessible within Alchemy's tab. So I can go ahead and map those to macros within the overall rack. And I'm just going to quickly rename macro 1. And I'm going to rename macro 2 green down. So let's have a listen to both of those here. So I've just added a little MIDI pattern here, going to our instrument rack, our granular bass. And I've got it playing quite nicely with the patterns from our scanner bass tutorial. So let's just have a quick listen to those together. Okay, so that's great. So I've just gone and added a little bit of automation to those two macro knobs, the grain sweep up and the grain down. And I'm just going to let you hear what I've done here. So it sounded great. I do feel, though, like I can overdrive this a little bit more. And I'm going to pop back into Alchemy here. And I'm going to work with the effects that I've already got dialed up. And I'm also going to work with potentially adding another distortion. So I'm just going to start this playing and tweak this a little bit. So that's quite nice. That's a really, really good use of an overtone coming from a granular synthesis engine, which is layered over top of another oscillator to make an overall very thick sound. We're balancing it out with a little bit of a sub coming from operator, and we're adding a couple effects and setting up some internal macro routing to these perform knobs in Alchemy, which are then getting sent out to the macro knobs of an instrument rack here, which we're using to automate some of the internal settings of that granular engine. So overall, a great sounding patch, and I'll just play a couple notes up and down the keyboard here. And that shows off some of the strengths of granular synthesis. It's a really, really cool form of synthesis to use, especially when you want a heavily modulated sound. And it provides you with some really cool tools to work with because it is sample-based. And so you can essentially change up the oscillator however you want by adding in new waveforms and using those to drive the engine. So that is how you can use granular synthesis to make a really cool bass tone.